So I'll transition it over a couple minutes early here then. We are going to have Elaine speaking next on MEV activity since the merge, strategies, searchers, and builders during market panics.
Okay, cool. Just checking if the audio is working. Right, so in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to go through some of the MEV activities since the merge. I'll touch a bit on everything, including the strategy, the searcher strategy, the proposals, the builder competition market, and specifically touching to recent stress or market crisis events. Yeah, so let's get started. So before I go into the data, I'd like to highlight the concept of MEV because it's a theoretical value that sometimes it's difficult to assess and obtain all the data on chain to do this. So therefore, we introduced a concept of realized extractable value. So REV is the actual value that we can observe on chain that's from the MEV opportunities. So before the merge, we've done something similar by collecting the REV from the proposer balance change or the minor balance change. And after the merge, we are collecting the same data. So here we're using the ETH sent to the proposer as an approximation for the total REV. But bear in mind, the REV pi, which is only a portion of the MEV theoretical pi, also contains different parts. For example, we only look at the atomic arbitrages, the MEV opportunities. We don't look at any kind of arbitrages outside one block. There are also REVs on other domains, on cross domains, and also on centralized exchange, which currently we don't have too much data on these. So the numbers that we see currently in the ecosystem is mostly focused on atomic arbitrage or MEV opportunities on chain. And some of you might be aware of one of the products that we have from Flashbots, which is called the MEV Explore. And there have been many quotation of the numbers from MEV Explore. But just to highlight that MEV Explore only represents a small portion of the pie. So when you look at the data from MEV Explore, just bear in mind that doesn't tell you the whole picture. Okay, so let's have a look at the MEV activities since the merge on layer one. Back in 2021, we have produced similar numbers using MEV Explore. Here, we're showing on the right-hand side a 12 months coverage of MEV activities from liquidations and arbitrages, and that's in total 475 million. And bear in mind that the dollar value was based on the ETH price at the time at the end of 2021, which is probably much higher than where we are now. On the left-hand side is what I'm going to show you in the following slides. This is the 6 months since the merge. And in total, we've seen the total ETH sent to the validators around 146,000 ETH. That's equivalent to around 260 million in dollar value today. Just looking at this number again, just to highlight that we are using the ETH paid to proposers as an approximation for the total MEV. And we've seen this number have been accumulating since the merge, but you can see two distinct bar charts on the right-hand side here, where the weekly numbers are actually much higher than the other weeks. So these are the two events that I will talk about later on in my slides. So these are the two market crisis events happened recently. One in November, the FTX collapse. One in March, not too long ago, the bank run on SVB, and also the shortly depegging of the stablecoins. Just to show you all the parties involved in the supply chain, we're talking about only the ETH paid to proposers, which is only one component or one party involved in the supply chain. And if we make a simple assumption to say the other parties, other than the proposer and the searcher, receives no MEV, which is not exactly accurate at the moment. For example, the builders, some builders do take a profit from building the block. But let's just assume the breakdown is only between searchers and proposers. We see a 48% MEV going to the searcher and 52 going to the proposer. So the numbers I showed in the previous slides only represent that 52%, roughly on an average. Okay, so since the merge, what's happening with the relay? So we see the relay competition has been increasing. There are more relays in the ecosystem now than since the merge. At the beginning, we have just Flashbots and no other relays in the ecosystem. Now we have multiple relays, and you see Flashbots slot shares has been decreasing since the beginning of this year. At the bottom here, you can also see the ETH paid from Flashbots relay versus the others. You also see there used to be a gap where Flashbots relay pays more than the others, but now this gap is closing rapidly. Looking at the builder space, also at the beginning, we have, since the merge, we have Flashbots and also builder 0x69 dominating the market, but then the share from Flashbots builder also started to decrease since the beginning of this year. And now we have shown just the top 10 builders in the space that we can identify. But at the same time, there are many other smaller builders I haven't included, which I will touch base on the later slides. So latency. So what do we mean by latency? Usually, among all the parties involved in the supply chain, we look at when the block submission happens. So this slide shows the time the validator asks for the get header from the builder. So this is around 400 milliseconds after the slot starts. So after this 400 milliseconds, the validator starts to ask for the bid from the block builder. And when was the block ready? On average here, we see that the average winning blocks means the blocks that actually landed on chain, on average, they arrive 149 milliseconds before the slot starts. Just going to show you the winning blocks, also the proposed, the landed blocks versus all the blocks submitted to a slot. So this chart shows you actually a very interesting picture that most of the blocks actually submitted in the last 2 seconds of the slot. And this is what we are talking about in terms of latency. So there is a delay from each involved party to submit the block as late as possible to the end of the slot, so they can include as much transaction as possible to increase the total profit. So here, this picture just shows you that most of the blocks that landed on chain arrives 2 seconds before, and also some of them are too late, 2 seconds after the slot ends. But at the beginning, let's say the first 10 seconds, there are not that many blocks being submitted. So high latency in block submission could cause some major issues. For example, the delay in the attestation and also the congestion in the last few seconds to the network. I believe there are speakers talking specifically about the latency problem in the later sections. So I won't touch too much details in this. So now zooming in to the 2 recent market panic events. One happened on the 9th of November when FTX and Three Arrow Capital collapsed. And the other one, very fresh in your mind, probably just a few weeks ago, that we saw the SVB bank run and the stablecoins such as USDC and DAI depegged shortly. So here's a chart showing the Bitcoin price and the ETH price during these 2 crises. Interestingly, you see the first crisis actually lasted much longer, all the way until almost the beginning of February, whereas the recent event recovers very swiftly. So why do we want to look into these two events, and what is particularly interesting? So here we can see the daily MEV paid to the proposers have reached all-time high since the merge in a recent event. And that's like 9 times more than the average daily MEV. And that's due to the USDC DPEG events shortly happened after the SVB bank run. Whereas before in the FTX collapse event, we see a slightly less severe in terms of the MEV sent to proposers, but still 6 times more than the average. Also looking into the MEV from a searcher's perspective, we collected the data from Eigenfy. This is showing the arbitrage, sandwich, and liquidation specifically during these two events. You can also see the same pattern can be observed from this chart where the arbitrage volume on that day skyrocketed. And interestingly, looking at the cross domain, so the cross domain shows a slightly different story. You can see the FTX event has more impact on the cross domain, whereas the recent bank run, SVB bank run, and the DPEG event is more contained within the Ethereum network. So interesting data from semiotics cross-chain MEV. Specifically, we are going to look at how much ETH were paid on these 2 days to proposers, and what's the builder competition look like during these 2 days, and also the latency in block submission, and these are on Ethereum. And we're also going to look at the cross-domain strategies on these 2 days. So on the 11th of March, when the bank run happened, we see that 6,000 ETH has been sent to the proposers. So this is equivalent to, or even more than, the average weekly total ETH paid to proposers. So at the bottom here, you see the weekly average is around 4,000, where on that single day, on the 11th of March, you see 6,000 paid. Similarly, on the 9th of November, when FTX collapsed, you see around 4,000 ETH paid. So these are extremely large single-day MEV activities that I'm highlighting here. On the right-hand side, I have a breakdown by the builders in terms of the total ETH paid to proposers. So back in November, we see that the top builders, Flashbots, Beaver Build, and Builder 69 dominates the market, taking about over 60% of the market. But in a recent event, the top builders portion have actually decreased. We see more builders coming into the space, and the non-top builders, or the smaller builders, actually takes 60% of the total ETH paid to proposers. So you see a kind of decentralization happening, a diversification in the builder market from the recent event compared to back in November. Now, what about the searcher strategies? So we also look at these 2 days. So on the left-hand side, you can see the arbitrage on these 2 days. And on the right-hand side, you can see the liquidation. So bear in mind, I mentioned the MEV Inspect Pi, which powers the MEV Explorer dashboard, is only counting liquidation and arbitrage. So it's only a small portion of what's happening on that day. Just to highlight that Eigenfy also provides this data, and they also cover a wider spectrum of the MEV types. They also cover sandwiches, and also probably more protocols are included. But here I'm just sampling the data on these 2 days from MEV Explore, you can see that most of the arbitrage happened among Ethereum, Bitcoin, and stable coins. So in terms of the token that's been arbed, they're very similar between these two events. But in terms of the liquidation, it's more event based. So as you can see, the recent event at the bottom here, we see the curve pool actually have gained a lot more portion in the whole pie, whereas the November event is also simply arbing through across different tokens. Okay. In terms of the search strategy by protocol, this is also looking into MEV Explore data, where we included 9 different protocols in this data. Just comparing the 2 days, we see the same story basically. Back in November, when FTX collapsed, most of the arbitrages happened on Uniswap V2 and V3, whereas the recent event, we see an increase in the percentage in arbing on the Curve stablecoin pool. And in terms of liquidation, the recent event has not much in terms of dollar value of liquidation. That's kind of obvious because the recent event is not highly correlated to a liquidation event, whereas the FTX has a wider effect in the market where more liquidations were happening. Okay, in terms of latency, here on the left-hand side, we see the November FTX event, and then on the right-hand side, we see the recent event. Very interestingly, the chart on the right-hand side is very similar to the overall chart that I've shown at the beginning of this presentation. And it's probably showing that the latency gain is more severe if we compare it to the beginning of the merge, because most of the blocks, if you look back to November, are submitted quite evenly across different time frames of the 12 seconds, whereas now most of the blocks are submitted in the last 2 seconds. So just in a short span of 4 months, we see the latency gain is more severe. So this is probably not related to the market panic events, but more of a time comparison in terms of the relay and the builders getting more sophisticated and competing on lending the block. Now looking at the cross-domain, we have 2 different types of events happening also on the cross-domain. The top arbitrage tokens are very similar to the single domain or on Ethereum. You can see most of the hopping paths happened or initiated from either the stablecoins or Bitcoin or ETH. So this is also very similar in terms of the percentage. So it's probably not that different across different market events. Just one thing to highlight, again, the cross-domain MEV in terms of US dollar value is much higher back in the FTX collapsing event. But the recent event has a much lower MEV value. Looking at the chains and the particular path, we see that Ethereum and BSC are the most frequently arbed chains. And also, one thing to notice is back in November, we also see Polygon and Arbitrum, whereas in the recent event, it's mostly between Ethereum and BSC. Okay, lastly, just a little bit more detail on the top 10 arbitrages by profit. We have shown the top 10 arbs conducted across different domains. So this is the exact path the the bots have simulated, where the bots can detect any arbitrage opportunities. Just to bear in mind that the data provided here is not actual cross-chain MEV realized data. It's based on simulations across 8 different chains and around 40 different decentralized exchanges and 60 tokens. So there might be inaccuracy in the simulation where the missing arbitrage opportunities or the missing data could cause the value to be even higher. So just to summarize, I've talked a lot about different activities, MEV trends in L1, in cross-domain since the merge. So what we can summarize is that we know that MEV estimation is very difficult. We have only limited data from Ethereum and on-chain data. There is a lack of data in the estimation of MEV in the centralized exchange activities. We also observe more relays and builders come into the ecosystem since the merge, and the space is more diversified. The top builders' market share, interestingly, during the high MEV periods have actually decreased. So this is also a sign showing that the builder market is more diversified than since the merge. In terms of search arbitrage strategies, we don't see too much of a difference between different market crises. Most of the arbitrage strategies focus on arbing across Ethereum, Bitcoin, and stablecoins. The liquidation strategies are actually event-based. So if it's more of a crisis that's related to liquidation of certain assets, then you will see the liquidation number in terms of MEV goes up. But in the recent event, this is not the case. Cross-domain strategies also have the same pattern. The MEV activity spiked during the crisis, but in terms of the magnitude, on average, it's much higher than the daily average, probably because a lot of the cross-domain arbitrages on a daily basis are not as much as on Ethereum, but when major events happen, the bots are searching everywhere for opportunities. So that's why you see much more of a spike during these events. And also, the strategies differs from different market crises. It's event-driven. And lastly, just want to mention that because of the lack of data, we have a lot more room to improve in terms of the estimation of cross-domain MEV, the centralized exchange to decentralized exchange MEV. And there's still a lot of work to be done to collect the accurate MEV activities and total values. So here is a list of the references and also some of the interesting readings that I recommend. Lastly, special thanks to Tina from Flashbots and Eigenfi, Bloxroute, Metrica, Semiotics, and Block Native for helping me preparing the slides and contributing to the charts and the data.